Well, good afternoon. This is Peter Frank, and I'll be leading our webinar today, Finances Made Easy with Church360 Ledger. I am the Senior Manager of Concordia Technology Solutions. There we go. Get my contact information on the screen there. I do apologize. There's been a change in plans. Dave Farnham, one of our software consultants, was scheduled to lead this webinar, and I know he's the one who communicated with you as you signed up. But we had a little bit of a building, I wouldn't say emergency because it wasn't that extreme, but we had some issues with our air conditioner. So we are, I had to make the last minute change in plans. I've led these webinars before, so I'm happy to fill in for Dave because I am the one who has a laptop and can broadcast from home. So Dave is comfortably resting in his air-conditioned house with most of our other employees, while our leadership team here is keeping the business going from our home. So thank you for being with and for being patient with the change in plans. Like I mentioned, I'm the Senior Manager of Concordia Technology Solutions, pardon me. My contact information is on the screen, and I'm happy to talk with you. If you've got any questions, I'll have Dave's contact information on the screen at the end as well. But a few housekeeping items before we get started. There we go. We'll be presenting for about 50 minutes. I've got an outline that I'll be following today. We're going to go through a practical example of how to use Church360 Ledger to make your finances easy. I may go a little over 50 minutes. I tend to be a little long-winded, so I apologize for that, but there's so many great things to show off that I get a little too excited sometimes. My plan is to allow for 10 minutes of questions at the end. Now, if I see that there are no questions in the queue, I may go a little over just to make sure we have enough time to cover everything. But if you have questions as we go, please go ahead and put them in the queue. You can just ask it for me and then I'll answer at the very end. If I happen to see it as I go through and it fits with the outline, I'll answer it at that time too. So yeah, there we go. Ask questions throughout, please. We are recording this. If you are one of those who have joined us at the after the fact, thank you for watching it later on. If you are joining live, I appreciate you being here. It's a wonderful afternoon to talk about church finances, as most afternoons are. I love talking about Church360 Ledger because of how we went about building it so that everybody can use it regardless of your background. That's what we're going to get into here in just a minute. But before we do that, I start off most of my webinars with a picture from our past. This is Concordia Publishing House's display at the 1904 World's Fair. And I like to show this because it's in sharp contrast to this picture from now, where it's our innovation center, where we are actively keeping up with the trends in technology. And we've been developing church software here at CPH since 1984, so over 30 years now. But while our company has changed, while the world has certainly changed, the message and the reason of what we do stays the same, and that's to help churches share the gospel with the world. And one of the ways that may seem a little bit distant from that is through church finance software. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, is church finance software. Now, I did mention I'm the manager of Concordia Technology Solutions. We are the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House. So we're one and the same, but we go under the name Concordia Technology Solutions because that's more appropriate to what our group provides. And that is software like Church360 Ledger. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But to give you a little bit of background on how it fits into our overall strategy, it is part of the Church360 suite. And the other products are Church360 Members and Church360 Unite. And we're only going to mention those briefly where there is an integration point with Church360 Members, but Ledger can stand on its own. And as we talk about church finances, it's really a standalone program because of the type of data that it manages. And it's sensitive data, but not in the same way that pastoral visits are sensitive, and that's tracked in Church360 Members. So that's how it fits into the big picture. Like I mentioned, it is church finance software. It's intuitive, it's secure, it's focused on churches. And that's really what distinguishes it from everything else, is that we made it intuitive enough that even if you don't have a background in finances, you can use it. But it's secure enough that it provides all the accountability that is needed at the church level, and it is focused on churches. We built it with churches as mind. So many options that are out there can also be used for businesses. That's not really what we're going for here. A business would struggle to use Ledger, but a church will find it quite comfortable. Okay, so the outline for today is we're going to go through an overview of the software. We're going to tour the software and actually take a look at it. That's going to be where we spend the majority of our time. And then we're going to get into question and answers at the end. And I see that we've already got some questions in the queue. That's fantastic. Gary, thank you for posting that. I'll be answering those as we go. In fact, the setting up separate funds will be one of the first things we talk about. Okay, so I'm making a few assumptions today about who is attending this. I'm assuming you're familiar with church finances, that this isn't your church finances 101 training, because we're not going to get into all of that. We're going to show how to use the software. But I am assuming that you're new to the software. I'm assuming you're new to Church360 Ledger. If you've been using it for a while, a lot of this will be kind of repetitive for you. But if you're new to this, you'll pick up a lot. I'm also assuming you're extremely busy, and so I've yet to meet somebody who's working in the church, whether in a paid or volunteer capacity, who is not extremely busy. So if this doesn't seem to be what you need, I'm not going to be offended if you need to step away and do something else, or if you get interrupted. Please use this as much as it's valuable to you. That's our goal here. So a few things as we get started. This goes into why we developed Church360 Ledger the way we did. Talking about church finances can often be difficult, and I'm on the board of elders at our church, and we talk about stewardship and offerings. We always have to approach that sensitively, and that's because every dollar is donated. In the church, we don't have these levers that we can turn on new revenue. It's coming from our members, which means that as every dollar has been donating, every dollar comes from the heart. And that's important to remember, that people are giving for the sharing of the gospel, that it's coming out of their pockets into the church, into these accounts that we're going to be setting up and that we're going to be tracking. But it's really coming out of their desire to share the gospel. And that's why it's so difficult to talk about asking for more, because we know everybody's giving with good intentions and giving as much as they can, or we assume they're giving as much as they can. So that makes stewardship difficult. And stewardship in a variety of different ways. It means that accountability is critical, that we have to manage these dollars that have been given to the church to the best of our abilities, so that we can have this proper stewardship, that we're doing the best things that we can, that we're not making silly mistakes, that we're not doing anything intentionally wrong, because everything is going to support the gospel. So that's kind of the overriding thing. Accountability is critical. As we get into this, we'll take a look at all of these different things. Accountability, though, is two things. Like I mentioned, it's preventing the ill-intentioned from doing wrong, and it's preventing the well-intentioned from making mistakes. Here we go. And so Church360 Ledger helps support both of those things. And that's, as we talk about making finances easy, these are difficult things to do. And we try to make that inherent in the software so it just becomes easy as you go. All right, so how do churches provide accountability in the congregation setting? Well, it's through people. You'll have volunteer, ministry, volunteer treasurers. Oops, my PowerPoint's a little slow today. I apologize for that. You'll have paid finance coordinators. You have elected church treasurers. You have elected finance boards. Each of these is more accountable to the next. So the ministry treasurers are accountable to the finance coordinator, who's accountable to the treasurer, who's accountable to the finance board. Your church may be set up differently, but these layers of accountability are certainly going to be there, or at least I hope they are. Church360 Ledger was designed to increase the accountability. It was designed to prevent mistakes. It was designed we designed this by focusing on two key personas, two key personalities. So these are looking at it from two ends of the spectrum. The first one is our church treasurer. And our church treasurer is somebody, I apologize, it's going so slow, who's an experienced accountant. Generally, in our experience, we found that most churches can find somebody with some level of experience in accounting. And so we view this person who is an experienced accountant who oversees all aspects of the finances, cares about the details, and he relies on an audit trail. You know, that's a key part of it, is making sure that we can see exactly what's going on. Now, we also have this idea of a willing volunteer. And a willing volunteer is somebody who can balance their own checkbook, they can enter transactions for the church. They care more about the ministries than anything else. Finances are something they're doing to help out, but they're doing it for the ministry reasons. And they don't want to make a mistake, but because of their lack of experience, it's more likely that they will. So Church360 Ledger provides the accountability that they both require. And that's the key aspect of it, is that it provides accountability in a variety of different ways, making your lives easier as you manage your finances. So today the goal is to go through a real-life example. We're going to explore all areas of the software. It'll be brief. We won't go in depth. But I want you to ask yourself, how can I use Church360 Ledger to support my ministry? All right, the example we're going to use today is something that I'm very familiar with, summer mission trips. Now, it's been a while since I've been on a mission trip, but they're near and dear to my heart. And so the reason I'm using this example is that you can have multiple income streams coming into this. Now, summer mission trips often require a registration fee and then fundraising. So we're going to go through both of those as income accounts. Multiple expense accounts. There's all sorts of different types of expenses with mission trips. So we're going to go through that. We'll set a specific budget because generally churches will dedicate a certain amount. That doesn't cover the full costs, but as you get fees and other things, you'll be able to meet those budgets. Ministry leaders who need access. Usually there's multiple volunteers who are leading these trips and they need to see where they're at financially. And it requires a certain level of reporting. That's the accountability that we talked about. So we're going to look at that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch gears here. And let me sign in. I set up a new account for today so that we're on a blank slate. And I did that because I want to make sure that we're not distracted by all the details. And speaking of distractions, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam now. Just because I want to focus on the screen. And I'm using Google Chrome. That's what we recommend using. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this. And the first place we're going to start is setting up our books, as we call it. And so that's part of the setup process. Is we go into books. Books encompass your entire chart of accounts and transactions, but you can have more than one book for a church. Now, if you're coming from Shepherd Staff or our other church management software or something else, there may be different naming conventions for this. But I think in Shepherd Staff we call it a fund. So to separate funds, and I'll give you an example. Right now we're in Christ Community Church, and that's the only book we have. But if we had maybe a school, Christ Community School, whoops, let me type that in again, and they may have a different fiscal year. And so starting date is going to be August 1st. Actually, let's go back a year. August 1st, 2016. So we could set up a different set of books for the school, and you can access them this way. And so you can toggle between the church and the school. And you can see how easily that changes. It always lets you know which one you're on. Now, we're not going to do any more with the school today. That's not the focus, but I just wanted to show that you could do that. Another thing within there is that within the books you can have, you can change your fiscal year. So I mentioned that there are different ones. The church is on a calendar year. The school is on a school year schedule. My guess is, and I haven't seen any instances to the contrary, my guess is that your church and school are always going to be on the same fiscal year for financial purposes, making things a little bit easier. But I'm just doing this as an example because I know that our churches that we work with will have different fiscal years. But if you need to change that, you have that option here. So if you're switching to maybe an August for start of fiscal year, you can do that as you go. Okay, so those are the key things to get us started. A few other little details. There's general settings here where you can set your church name, your address and information. You know, if you can see your customer number in here, two different styles of checks, a lot of little details that aren't really important for today. What I really want us to start off though is in the chart of accounts. Now here I apologize, I jumped right into this going too fast. I didn't even talk about the navigation. I mentioned up here on the top where you have your different set of books. To the far right, you've got some icons here. The print queue, the report section, that's this little notebook, the settings queue. We'll go back to that in just a moment. The users, and so you can set up user settings for like login information, passwords, and the like. All of that is over here. But the settings cog is where we're going to spend a lot of the time at the start. And this is divided into two different sections. The first 5 things on there are related directly to the set of books that you're on. Or so like in this case, the church. The bottom half there, and you see we've divided it by a line, that's meant for your account. And so like your settings for the account, your users, your roles, books we already looked at, payees, we'll talk about that in a bit. All of those are accessible across the different books. Now, of course, the data, the transactions that you enter, we use that information in different ways, and you can set up users to only have access to certain books. But that's how we divide that up. And so as we start looking at the chart of accounts, it's important to remember that this and all the things below that, these 5 below that, are all tied directly to the church set of books, not the school. All right, let's go to chart of accounts. Chart of accounts are divided up into 4 things, and if you're familiar with finances, you know these very well. Assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. And so we're going to create a few accounts. Oops, I apologize, I didn't mean to switch back to that. I'm trying to switch to my outline to make sure I cover everything as we go, and I may do some copy pasting for the interest of time. So I start off with assets. Assets and liabilities refer to what we call real money. Like there's actual dollars tied behind this, whereas income and expenses is how you allocate that across your accounts. And if you're new to church finances, I'll explain that a little bit as we go. So within each one of these, as you toggle between them, you can see that you have the option to add accounts and categories. Now categories, think of those as like folders. You can't actually tie transactions to them, but they group your accounts together. So here's an example. The first category, which we're going to call Central Trust, and that's the bank that we're using, and so that's our category. Within the bank, we may have something like a checking account where we can write checks, and we'll put a number in here. Now, if you're used to numbering conventions, you can use those as you go. So like if you have a variety with Shepherd staff, we use dashes and 2 digits and 3 digits as we go. You can use that, or if you wanted to use it for the actual account that the bank uses, you could do that too. We're going to put initial balance of 0 in there. We're going to talk about how to get balances in there. So we're going to go ahead and submit that. And we're just going to drag it over here so that it is under Central Trust. Now we can add a new account that we call Savings Account. And so like I said here, if you wanted to do something like the bank uses, you could do that too. There's no set style for it. And we're actually going to do an initial account or a balance of, let's see, $5,000. All right, we'll move that under Central Trust as well. Now you see that total under Central Trust shows the combined total of each. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put $500 for that. And that total didn't update for me. I think that'll update. Yeah, there we go. So checking and savings. I'm going to go ahead and save that to show you. Now we've created 1 category, Central Trust, 2 new accounts, and we're going to confirm that. Now, as we get into donations, we'll talk about restricted funds in more detail. But In the church, you receive offerings or donations for specific purposes, and you are obligated to use those offerings, those donations for that purpose. And so that's why we've created what we call restricted funds, to say when you receive a donation for this specific purpose, you have to use it for what it was given. So as we go and create a new restricted fund for a mission trip, we'll call it Summer Mission Trip. And we'll click Submit. Now you'll see that I get two new funds. I have a restricted fund that I created and an unrestricted, and it refers back to the parent account. So right now all $500 are unrestricted, meaning I can spend them on whatever the ministries need. It could be on the mission trip, it could be on office supplies. And we'll look at adding to that later on. So I'm going to go ahead and save these changes again. I like to save early and save often. Just makes me comfortable. It will let you know if you're trying to leave and you haven't saved something. So that's a basic setup for assets. You'll probably have more complex things than that. Now, liabilities down here is money that you owe. Now we're going to create a new category, again with Central Trust. And this time we're going to create two different types of accounts. The first one we're going to call mortgage. So this is the new church building. We're not going to put a balance, or I'm sorry, we're not going to put an account number in there. We're going to paste in a balance. And we'll save that. Oops. I don't know why. I think I pasted it in as text and it didn't like that. So there we go. That's better. Move it under Central Trust. We're going to add another account called the credit card. And we're going to do a 0 initial balance for that and bring it over here. Okay, so that doesn't affect the total at all. Now, we don't recommend churches put things on credit. Mortgages are sometimes necessary, but credit cards can be good for security reasons. As opposed to giving members access to your debit card, you could have a ministry credit card that you give to ministry leaders that have limits to it. Maybe they can only spend $500, and that helps you manage it. That's the accountability we were talking about before. So that's why we're using that. I've had some questions about, well, why are you recommending churches use credit cards? It's an example. It's not a recommendation. Okay, so there's that. All right, now let's go into income. Now, income is money that is received into the church. And this is separate than the assets. And as we look at the entering transactions, we're following this model of accounting where it's got T-charts, so everything balances. That's not going to make much sense if you're new to accounting, but for those of you who are experienced in accounting, you can take comfort in knowing that we take care of all the credits and debits accordingly, and you'll see that as we go. So let's get some income accounts in there, and I'll show you more. So we're going to create two categories first. We're going to call this first one offerings. We're going to call this next one fees. And we're going to create a number of accounts. So we're going to create the general fund. Oops, and we're going to do 0 balance. And we're going to create the, oops, let me go back here. We're going to create the building fund with a 0 balance. We're going to create the mission trip. We're going to call it Summer Mission Trip Fund with a 0 balance. We're going to move all of these under offerings. These are donations that we've received for these specific purposes. And then under fees, we're going to say Summer Mission Trip Registration. 0 balance to start. And then let's do one more account just so we have 2 in there. Oops. Facility rentals. These are the kind of fees that the church receives, the income they receive, that are not donations. We'll save that and confirm. All right, now expenses. We'll switch to that here. And we may have things like salaries as a category. We may have supplies, and we may have something like ministries. All right, now as we create accounts, like you may have something for Pastor Williams is a salary. And you may have something like internet as a supply. And you may have something like summer mission trip as an expense. Now, actually, I'm going to back out a second. I'm going to create that as another category, summer mission trip, and then we're going to add a few accounts. So on the summer mission trip, we're going to do VBS, and so we'll have VBS materials as an account under the summer mission trip. And then we may also have snacks and beverages. If you're leading a VBS, you need to have refreshments. Okay, so now we can start moving this over and say, okay, Pastor Williams is a salary, internet is a supply, summer mission trip is a ministry, VBS materials are tied to the summer mission trip, and snacks and beverages are as well. Now let's also add in travel, because that's certainly going to be something that is an expense with the mission trip. And you just drag and drop it, and you create this tree, and you can have as many categories as you need, just at the account level that you process the transactions. All right, I'm going to confirm all of that. All right, so that's in place now. I'm going to show you here under our chart of accounts report, and you can start seeing how this breaks down. We've created a lot in a short amount of time. That's one of the things that's easy about it, is you just click new, add in the details. It requires very little, and then you keep moving forward. So we can break this down: assets, liabilities, income, and expense. You can see our assets and liability balances there. That's real dollars that we either have or we owe. And then nothing in income and expense yet. All right, so let's add some budgets in here just to get started. That's also under the settings, under budgets. Now you can only budget for income and expense accounts. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We've got some minimum widths in here, but we want to try to get the budget onto the whole view, because that just makes it a little bit easier to see. So for the summer mission trip, let's just say that we're planning on getting $12,000 in donations. If you type it into the total, it'll split it out from month to month. And maybe you don't always get things at the first part of the year, but as we get closer to July, you get $3,000 for budgeting. We can take a little bit, so you can start off by splitting and then say, okay, there's our $12,000. Now we're not going to budget for everything here, even though we could. Fees, we're going to get $12,000 in donations. We're going to get $24,000 in fees. It's a very big mission trip, and we get most of those, all of those, we'll say, in June. That's when they're due. Now you can also budget expenses. So maybe VBS materials, which we're going to buy in June, are going to cost $500, and snacks and beverages are going to cost $400, and then travel, going to this exotic location that we have not yet named, is going to be, let's say, $18,000, and we'll save that. And so now we have this budget in place just for the things we need, not everything. You would budget everything so you know that it's a balanced budget. So you can have that down there, income less expense. Our total is about $17,000 in the positive. That's really good. This becomes a profit-generating mission trip. That may not be good, but this is just an example. Okay, let's talk about transactions. So before I get into that, I'm going to click on this orange button here, and it'll take me to the home screen. And this is all transactions. Now you'll notice that there's already some transactions in there, even though we haven't started entering anything yet. And those are because we actually did enter in beginning budgets. Now you'll see here that there's 3 line items. They're all journal entries, meaning that they are tracked back to the beginning. And as we begin entering our information, we're going to get everything right as of a certain date, so that everything has an initial balance like we've got there, and Any changes to it after that initial balance are tracked as transactions. That's accountability to say that, well, we didn't just switch the beginning balance because it didn't balance out right during our monthly review. I've heard of churches who do that. That's not a good practice because you can easily hide things in those, beginning balances. So we don't allow you to change it from an accountability perspective. All right, let's talk about some new transactions. Well, first, let's transfer some money. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. I'm going to do a deposit. So let's say Sunday offerings, we begin to receive donations. And so we'll track this back to the 18th. Now, pays are optional. You don't have to do that for deposits. Other things like payments, you do. All right, so first, we're going to say into the unrestricted checking account, we're budgeting from this weekend $3,000. And of the general fund, that was $2,000. And of the building fund, that was $100. Now you'll see as I do this, it starts to tell me how much is left. It also starts filling out this T chart down here. We call it a T chart, imagining a T right at this spot. Now credits and debits are correctly applied, and you'll see that it's hitting the general fund as well, which is an income account, as well as the unrestricted checking, which is an asset, and it balances here. That's the whole goal of making them balance. So in order to make a balance, we have $900 that we need to add to the right side into an income account. And so that goes into Summer Mission Trip Fund. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now we've got more transactions. There it is, a $3,000 transaction. And I'm starting to get a chart here to show me where I'm at. All of that's great. Let's talk about transferring, because all of our money right now, if we go into the chart of accounts report, you'll see that all of our money is in the unrestricted checking. Oops. Oh, there we go. I was looking starting balance, ending balance, because the $3,000 came in. Pardon my squeaky chair. Now you can also do that by going here to Assets, Central Trust, Checking Account, and Unrestricted. All right, so we know that during that transaction, we had $2,000 go to General Fund. But we also have Building Fund, Restricted, and Summer Mission Trip. We're going to ignore the Building Fund. We got $900 moved to Summer Mission Trip Fund. Now I can do a transfer and say, okay, from this unrestricted checking, do $900 to the Summer Mission Trip. And if you read that, it's a little late here. Assets, Central Trust, Checking Account, Summer Mission Trip. And I'll go ahead and select that. It does the accounting for me, and I'll hit save. All right, so there's that. Let's take a look at one other thing. I realized that I'm going to do a deposit for registration fees, but the income, oh, I did create it. Good. I'm a little tired. I haven't had much coffee yet today, so, and it's almost 2 o'clock. Sorry about that. We're going to go and create a new transaction that's a deposit of registration fees, and we can put that in the memo. Mission Trip Registration Fees. We'll do that today. We don't have a single pay, it's multiple. We're going to put it under the Summer Mission Trip Restricted. We're going to say $14,000 goes to Income Summer Mission Trip Registration. Now, all of that's going in the same bank account, into the same restricted fund, Summer Mission Trips. But the income is coming from Mission Trip Registration, not offerings, because that is not a charitable gift. They're getting something in return. In this case, it's plane tickets. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now you see we've got something under income. That's pretty easy, and our asset account is growing. So if we go to Central Trust Checking, Summer Mission Trip, we're up to almost $15,000. That's great. All right, let's do some spending now. If I want to do a new payment, and let's say this is for refreshments, I can go in here and say we're getting them from Walmart, They're coming from summer mission trip, and they're $300, and they're going to snacks and beverages. That's what I called it. So that's our expense. We're taking it out of our asset, out of that checking account, which is restricted for this trip. And we'll hit save. And there it shows up down below. And it's got those two lines because they are separate accounts. And we need to distinguish that. So there's the payment. Oh, and sorry, I was looking at the deposit. It is two lines, but it's when you go home. And you can go through your different chart of accounts here by going to, let's go to Assets. And you can just click on Home as well. You can see there's the registration fees. It is, and there's two lines. One, the registration, there's the restricted fund. Okay, so let's go ahead and make another transaction. And we'll call this one actually a check. And we're going to write Summer Mission Trip VBS Materials. And we're going to say it's Concordia Publishing House. We've got some great VBS materials, especially for mission trips. We're going to pay it out of the Summer Mission Trip Fund, $350. And that goes under VBS materials, which is an expense account. All right. I think I'm missing something. Here we go. So we don't have a check number. That's what I'm missing. We don't need to put a check number at this time. If you are writing a check elsewhere, you can go ahead and enter the check. If you are printing the check, which we'll do in just a second, we're going to put this in our print queue. So we'll hit save. And it says the check was added to your print queue. When I go to print queue, there it is. What I can do right now is when I go to print it, I preview it here and say, okay, go ahead, print it. Now it tells me what check number to use. So even if I was starting with one number and then delaying this check for a few days and had to change it, I can change it here. And I think that's what people tend to do, is that if they have multiple checks that are going to be written, then they do it in the queue and put all the checks in the printer at one time and enter the check numbers as they go to print it. And this is just one, but it would show multiple check numbers if you have a queue ready to go. All right, I'm going to not confirm that as right now because I don't have a printer hooked up, but I can mark it as printed and it'll remove it from the queue. And it says, the one has not been printed. Are you sure about this? Yes. There we go. Okay, so that's a different type of transaction. So we've done a transfer, we've done a deposit, we've done payments, and we've done a check. Now, if you are doing something on a house account, like with Concordia Publishing, we just wrote a check right to it, you could create that as a liability account and then pay to that. And I'd be happy to show that at the end if we have time, but it takes a few minutes. What I want to show now is transactions, or sorry, journal entry transactions. Journal entry is the key type of transaction to all of these other ones that we've done, deposit, transfer, all of that. But the difference is that this requires you to understand credits and debits. And if you are a treasurer, an accountant who knows exactly what they're doing, this may not be a problem for you. But for most average users, journal entries are not going to be something you want to take in. But I'll show you how it works. So, and I have to look at this as well. So if we're doing like summer or VBS materials, we'll just do that. By crediting the summer mission trip account, we're decreasing that. We're decreasing an asset, and debiting an expense, we're increasing that expense to say that so far this year we've sold $350 or we've expensed $350. So if we wanted to do that as a journal entry, we could do that same kind of thing where summer mission trip gets credited $350, and then the VBS materials gets debited $350. And credits and debits may have some weird terms. When you think credit, like, I'm going to go get a credit for this, that's a return. We get more income with it. That doesn't always work. In this case, credit actually means we're reducing the amount of an income account. Now this gets into, pardon my yawn, this gets into finances in a way that we're not going to cover in more detail. I only show this for the purpose of our experienced accountants to say all transactions are journal entries, and if you want to do a journal entry apart from all the transaction paths that we have, you can do that. Now let me give you another example of a payment, and I'll show you another cool thing. So let's say AT&T is our provider of internet. We'll go unrestricted, oops, click on the right thing, $100, that is internet fees. We get this every month, June's internet fees. We could make this a recurring transaction, which means every month we get a pending transaction that says enter your internet fees. So you can say every single month on the third Monday, and save that. And now up here, oops, wrong one, under recurring transactions, it would show right there June's internet fees. I can go and modify that schedule as well. But now, the third Monday of every month, this will come up as a pending transaction. And I don't know if the queue will show right now because we don't have any pending transactions, but there will be a little notification right up here. All right, a few things to mention. If you are using paychecks for your church payroll, you can import those files here as transactions. And so while we don't have a dedicated payroll in-app, Paychex serves as our dedicated preferred payroll vendor, and they provide a great list of services and some discounts too for LCMS congregations. So that's what that is. The other type of transaction you can import are deposits from Church360 members. So in Church360 members, where you track all of your individual donations, you get a total, and that comes across here into Ledger, so you can make that actual deposit slip. All right, I could go into a lot more details on that. I don't think we have the time. I do want to head over back to the home page and show under Assets, Central Trust, Savings. Actually, I'm going to go back here. Central Trust, Summer Mission Trip. Let's see. Oops. I went too far. So because at the account level, the bank account is here under checking account, if we go into the restricted or unrestricted funds, those accounts can't be balances because both of them fall under a single account. So you have to be either the parent account or be rolled up into the parent account in order to reconcile. So as we go to reconcile, it shows all the transactions, both restricted and unrestricted. And the way you do this is pretty simple. You take your statement and enter the starting balance and the ending balance, and then you check all of the transactions that add up to it. And so in this case, if our beginning balance was 0 and our ending balance was 17, whatever my math is, that would be, wow. See, I'm a product of my generation in that I need to do everything using Excel or a calculator. I can't do math in my head anymore. So what I'm trying to do is take the running balance and add in the 350. So $16,850 plus the 350 is $1,720. There we go. Apologize, you had to witness that horrible mental math. My mother would be ashamed. All right, so as I go in here and I start checking all these off on the bank statement, all of these should add up. Oh, and actually, I guess I didn't need to do that. The bank statement would show me what I'm trying to track it. There we go. So the ending balance is after that. I forgot that it should be before that. So, and I could have looked here, there's the 17,200. That just didn't seem to make sense in my head. Oh well. The point is valid, and that you take your beginning balance, your ending balance, and you put in those transactions. Now, it's never going to be that clean. You'll probably find transactions that you need to add in here before you can reconcile. But once you save that, then these transactions can't be modified anymore. Now, when I say modify, I should show that too. If we were doing, let me go back to home, and here's the journal entry. Actually, I can't modify beginning balances. And I already reconciled everything. That was bad planning on my part. Let's do a new transaction, a new deposit, and we'll say into unrestricted $100 to the general fund as an offering. If we save that, I can go back and edit that transaction and say, actually, it was 125, sorry. And save that. All right, now that's changed from 100 to 125. Now the accountants in the room are probably feeling very uncomfortable because you shouldn't just be able to edit transactions. And that's correct, you shouldn't. But what we did was we modified it by adding in a journal entry. And so this, by modifying the transaction, we've created a corresponding journal entry that shows exactly what was changed. So no funny business can be introduced here in that way. All right, so as we go and look at reports next, let me make sure on my outline that there was no other. Yeah, reconciliation was next, and editing transaction. The next thing I want to show is reports. And we've got 4 different reports up here at the top. There's the general ledger report, which shows all of these different transactions. And that's where you can see that correction that I made. So we had deposit, we had checks, but all of those are the transactions that we made across all of it. That's your general ledger. And you can export this to Excel. You can print it as well. We have our income and expense report that shows everything compared to budget, and the remaining budget, what's left of that, if there is anything. And then we have our chart of accounts, which we looked at before, which has the starting and ending balances, the different credits and debits and changes that you made. And then we have the balance sheet. So the balance sheet shows where everything is right now, what it started at, where it ended at, and over the period of time. I forgot to show this date selector. If you want to do it by like a quarter, then that becomes your quarterly or balance sheet report. If we go here to quarter 2, you can do that same thing. So those are the 4 core reports that we have here. And they seem very simple. We get that a lot. It says, are there no more reports? Well, there are, but it just depends on what you're looking for. So like there's no categories of reports, but you can make all sorts of modifications to it. So maybe you wanted to see this general ledger thing, but you only wanted to see it a payee report for Concordia Publishing House. You could filter it down by that way and say, only show me, well, I guess it has to be quarter 2. And yeah, oops, there's that, and we change it just to Concordia Publishing House. So there's a payee report for that. Maybe you want to do all payees, but you want to group it by account. You could do that as well, and it'll show that grouping by account. And it'll show the memos and everything there. So you've got some flexibility there. The other thing is that as you're looking at reports, you can go and drill into, let's see what we've done from an offerings level. There's our offerings report for quarter 2, or maybe we do all of 2017. And we can see all of those different transactions that go with it. And that's like a report as well. You can export it to Excel, you can print that. So those are other types of reports. You build off of those reports. And you may be thinking as a report that everything is a nice clean print, and you can do that. You can go and print a report But we've really designed, yeah, there we go. It takes a second to print in the browser. We've really designed Ledger to be as a way for you to give access to this information, report on this information by giving access through permissions. And so that's one of the other things under the settings that I didn't show yet. And that's because I want to talk about how you use it. Reporting is really just sharing information with people. And rather than printing it out and handing it, you can give them access to everything that they need. And this goes back to the security. So what you can do is you can create a role, and you can say, well, ministry leader, and say it applies to the church, and they can view some accounts, not all accounts, and I'll show you that in a second, and they can, well, they can't really do anything but view. So we'll save that and say this ministry leader, now that we've chosen that we can do selected accounts, I want them to see the summer mission trip fund, summer mission trip income, and then all of the summer mission trip things under ministries. And we can close out of that, and they've got 6 accounts that they can view. So now I can give this ministry leader access by going into users and adding a new one and saying, well, there's Dave. We can say, Dave, you are a ministry leader. You can only view the mission trip accounts. And we may name it something different if we're just doing mission trips. But then you can invite Dave. He can log in and he can only view things. He can't enter things. He can't edit things. He can only view the transactions and only for his accounts. And so now he can compare things based on budget, and he can have all of this information without you having to share it with him. You do this one-time share, and he can check it out at any time. That goes back to what we're talking about as easy. And hopefully you've seen the easy part of all of this. Now, I'm running out of time, and there's one more thing I wanted to show, and that's our event log. And this can take a little time to load because there's so much information here. Every activity is tracked and referenced here, and it doesn't give you all the details, but it takes you to it. And you can see everything that I've done here over the last essentially 32 minutes or so. Actually, it's a little bit more than that now. But you can go in and, like, if you wanted to print the reconciliation again, you can go and see, here's my reconciliation. I can print this out, share it with whoever needs to see that I recognize it, or file it with my bank account. It's all right there. All of your activity has been tracked in your event log, and you can filter by user, by type, by action type. You can quickly link to different transactions and see what those were. There you can edit or void them, and it creates new journal entries to account for that. Well, I know I went through that very quickly. We're already at 1:52. We've got a few questions in here that I think I've answered, but I'll double check as we go. But while I take a look at that, I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. And I'm going to say, offer you a free 37-day trial of Church360 Ledger. If you haven't started yet, I encourage you to start the trial. And that'll give you a good idea of if it's something that you can use in your congregation. So why the 37 days? Why is that's a weird number? Well, that's so that you can get a whole month and a week in there. So if you need to reconcile, you can test that out. And before I go to questions, I'm going to put up my contact information and Dave's contact information. Like I said, I'm filling in for Dave today because we had to leave the building. But Dave is happy to help you once he's back in the office. And you can also reach me there. Actually, I should have put my cell phone because I'm at home today. That's my office phone. You can also contact me over email. That's probably the best way to do that. So let me take a look at the questions while I leave that on the screen. So Gary, you asked a number of questions at the beginning, which shows that you've probably already started to use this and had some key things you wanted to get answered. So I hope that I answered it for you. The first question, how do we separate funds? That was as we built up the chart of accounts, and that's if we're using the same definition of funds. So under chart of accounts, a fund often refers to like income funds, offering funds. We've put that in here. Or you could be referring to different accounts or categories, which I showed there, or you could be referring to books. Again, fund has multiple meanings, but I did show all of those. So if I didn't answer your question there, please put another follow-up, and I see you just put a follow-up in there. And it says, can account sums be arranged as footers instead of headers? And can data be separated by commas and use of dollar signs? So let me answer your first one. I think you're referring to, as we get into the different reports, or certainly here in the chart of accounts, it's headers being at the top rather than being at the bottom. And let me take a look and show you this income and expense report. We went back and forth on that as we developed these reports because it's summarizing the data, and the reason we did that is so that it could expand and contract from below and show those totals, and so you can see all of the details. Now what you can do is you can export these to Excel, and if you need to provide a printed report, and I'll give that a second to upload or open up, it puts it in here and it goes into what you were talking about where it's still at the headers. You could go in and manually rearrange it to be what you're most comfortable with. That's a little bit of work and probably not a great answer to it, but that is probably the best answer I have right now, is that it certainly doesn't change the data, whether it's at the top or the bottom. The experience of having things show what's included in that is better demonstrated by having it come up below it, but it really comes down to personal preferences. So I'm sorry that it doesn't show that right now. There is no good way to show it other than manipulating it in the reports themselves. And then your other question, can data be separated by commas instead of dollar and use of dollar signs? Most of our views have that. I believe as we go in here, yeah, you'll see it's all in there as well. I'm not sure where you're seeing that. It may be as you're setting up your chart of accounts. I know that does it. Like if we go and add a new account and you just type it in, it takes it as it types. By the time you save and refresh it, it modifies it like this. So there's your dollar signs, there's your commas, but you enter it in just as is. So that's maybe where you're seeing. If you're seeing that somewhere else, let me know as well. I'd appreciate that. Gary also asked, how do we transfer data among funds? And if you are referring to funds as accounts, you would use the transfer like I showed before, where you can transfer from $200 from unrestricted to summer mission trip. That's how you transfer that. If you're talking about transferring between books, that becomes a little bit more complicated because transactions are unique to books. They can't cross over books. So you would have to create two types of transactions. Now it can't be just a journal entry because you have to balance that out. If they're different books, they're different charts of accounts, they don't balance that way. And so what you'd have to do is do like a withdrawal, which will put it as an expense, and then do it as an income under your chart of accounts. You could also do a journal entry using whatever account you have, but you have to have a balance, and you can't do a journal entry across books. So a couple different answers there depending on your definition of funds. And then Gary's last question in there is, please explain how dedicated accounts are handled in 360 Ledger as restricted accounts. And dedicated accounts is a term that comes from Shepherd staff, where it's a different type of account, a fifth one. So assets, liabilities, income, expenses, dedicated. Well, we have done it differently here by having restricted funds flow from an account and create an unrestricted amount. And this allows it to be simpler, easier. Again, the theme of today is easier, and allows you to easily see that some dollars are restricted and some are unrestricted. And so you can take from the unrestricted as you go, or you have to be intentional about taking from the restricted. And that can be done from any asset account, just saying add a new restricted fund. And so if you have dollars in savings for your summer mission trip savings, we could even put restricted just to emphasize it. You can submit that and see you've got another unrestricted account there. We still have to move dollars into it. That has to be a transfer, a journal entry, but everything is able to go. All right, well, we are just about out of time, and I'm just about out of questions. Actually, Gary asked one more, and I just want to make sure, do you recommend using more than one bank account? For example, one each for general fund, book, and preschool fund or book. Yes, I would. If these are separate charts of accounts where they're being managed independently of one another, I would recommend different bank accounts. Otherwise, balancing them becomes a real challenge because all of your transactions should be in one chart of account. So like in here, if you've got central trust account for the church and you want to do a separate thing, you mentioned preschool, that is one thing where if you have the same bank account for both of those, you'll never be able to balance it correctly at the end of the month. Now, it depends on your church. I can't advise you on what's best for your church because I don't know the whole situation in terms of whether you should have separate funds or separate books for those two. My church has a school with it. It's all under the same set of books. However, we do have a men's club that has a separate set of books. They manage that separately, so they have their own bank accounts and everything. So that's how my church does it. Your church could do it that way or a different way. But in terms of having a one-to-one relationship with banks, yes, you could have you have multiple bank accounts with one set of books, but I would not recommend multiple setups of books with one bank account. And your last question right before we leave, because it's a quick one, can notes be entered? Yes, on every transaction you have the option to add memos. Oops, looks like I signed out. You have the option to add memos onto it. And so you can always track your activity on there. And so if you are doing separate book transactions where you're moving money from one bank account to another, you could put that same memo on there or reference transaction number X and have that all in there. And that's the best way to do it. No matter what type of transaction you have, deposit, journal entries, of course, make a lot of sense to have memos because they don't really describe what they are. You could do all of that, add those memos in, and then keep track of it. So that ends our presentation for today. Oh, and our notes limited to charter numbers or character numbers, I'm guessing. I don't believe we have a limit on those, Gary. So any other questions you have, you can email me or Dave. Gary, I thank you for the conversation back and forth. You've got a lot of great questions, and questions just add so much value to these presentations because they're real-life practical examples. So thank you for that. And for everybody else who's here today, thank you for attending, or for those of you who are watching after the fact. Thank you for watching this. Again, there's my contact information as well as Dave's. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm happy to answer more questions as we go. But with that, I'm going to wrap up and say thank you very much and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.